I was just thinking, where you are, Lord, I am free. I was just kind of moving through my mind as we were worshiping. But sometimes it's like, I don't recognize you. And sometimes it's like, but where are you? And that's kind of the story we're going to follow today, is that struggle. And it's a struggle we all have and we all find ourselves in. But ultimately, what we all really seek is that life. I want to be free. I want to know what that means. If that's not real, then I'm out. We're not trying to see how faithful we can be in a religion or a faith. We want to know where He is. We want to experience life. And so I kind of want to start, it's interesting because when I brought this to Eric, he's like, hey, can you do a devotional? And I'm like, okay. So I start going through notes and what is God speaking? And I wrestle with this and that. And I came with something and I'm like, I think this is what God is speaking. And so I wrestle with that a little bit. And what God does is He gives you a couple ingredients. He's like, here's 3 ingredients. Make something with it. And it's like, this is not easy. So I kind of brought a little something that was half-baked, and I was like, here, check this out. And so they tasted it, and they're like, that's not bad. Can you bring this to the church? And then I'm like, I don't think so. So, you kind of go back, and then you start working with the ingredients again, and God's like, try this, throw this in there, and you try and throw that in there. And I give it to my wife. She's tasted so much of this message. And she's like, that's half-baked. I don't really like the way that tastes. But anyways, we have to settle somewhere, right? So I want to really stick to the few ingredients that He gave me. But in order to do that and do it justice, and I have to provide some context. So we got to kind of move through what's happening here. I'm going to read, I don't know if Preston's here. Oh, Preston. Preston said, hey, I'll read the scripture for you. I appreciate it. But we're going to start in Matthew 14:22 through 33. This is where our story is today.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Preston.
So, starting in verse 22. Thanks, Eric. Immediately, He made the disciples get into the boat and go before Him to the other side, while He dismissed the crowds. And after He had dismissed the crowds, He went up on the mountain by Himself to pray. When evening came, He was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, He came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw Him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid."
Mm-hmm.
And Peter answered Him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out His hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped Him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Amen.
Thank you. This is the word of the Lord. This is.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks. And I also want to. That's Matthew's version. I'm going to go quickly through a couple verses. That's Mark's version. The apostle gathered around Jesus and reported to Him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in the boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So when Jesus landed, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like a sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. So a little context. Here's kind of what's going on here. The disciples were sent out on mission 2 by 2. And during this time, John the Baptist was beheaded. So when they were coming back, they got the body and took it to the tomb. At the same time, Jesus was in Nazareth preaching, and he was rejected, but he could only minister so much. So they meet up in Capernaum, and they're talking about, as they're telling them the stories. And he's like, look, you guys need to rest. Let's get something to eat. We're going to head over to a desolate place. You can see Capernaum up on the top left, and they're shooting over to where they kind of guess that's where the feeding of the 5,000 was.
There's a little laser.
Oh,
Here's the button.
I thought you said I wasn't allowed to use it. Okay, wow, this is cool. So they're here, they're coming over here. But in the meantime, the people recognized them. They were doing miracles, and people were being healed, and so people were like getting stirred up. And so they recognized them going across, but they started running around through these towns, gathering more and more people as they're going. So when they get here, they're ahead of them, and they're expecting they're going to some place to rest. But there was no rest to be had in that moment, because it was time for ministry. So we expect 5,000 to 15,000, because we know there were 5,000 men. But Jesus, in his compassion, started to minister to them. And that ministry probably looked like healings and, unclean spirits being cast out. And so after this is where we kind of begin our story. Is the people seeing all this were being stirred into a frenzy. And Caleb spoke on this when he spoke on the bread of life. They believed he was the Messiah, like the disciples, but the Messiah that had come to establish an earthly kingdom. And so they were like, we're going to anoint you king. And they were going to forcibly anoint him and make him king. And in this moment, he's told the disciples, get in the boat and go. And he went up to the mountain and began to pray. So my first point is a misunderstanding of Jesus. I don't know if you guys ever heard that song, I'm Dreaming of a Hawaiian Christmas. I used to sing it all through my childhood. And then one day it just kind of dawned on me, that's not what the song says. But I was 100% convinced that that's what the song says. I mean, I lived in Hawaii, so why would they sing about anything else? That's where everyone wants to be. But sometimes our perceptions are incorrect. And in this case, with the disciples, they had a misunderstanding of who Jesus was. And God loves us too much to let us continue to go with the wrong understanding of him. So here we are, the disciples. Oh, we're still in that. I didn't know how this works. So a couple things is, like we know previously in Mark, when they were in the boat with Jesus, the storm came and he calmed the storm. And then their reply to this miraculous event was, what sort of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? Some versions say, who is this? They still didn't recognize who this was that did these miracles. Mark's version of the story with Jesus walking on water, at the end, he tells us, and they were utterly astounded because they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. And those are a couple things that I'm like, didn't quite settle with me. Like, first of all, what didn't they understand? And secondly, how can their hearts be hard? That's like something with those who are unbelievers or opposed to Jesus. But the reality was, what Mark was saying is what happened during that miracle, they interpreted it as a teacher and Messiah who was gifted by God to come and bring the kingdom of God. Their hearts were hardened because they were fixed on this perception. They were like cemented in this idea, just like I was, that It was a Hawaiian Christmas. But even more so, it was more consequential. Their view of Jesus was this, this is who he was. So the foundation on which they based their convictions and drew their conclusions of the miracle were wrong. And they were only being reinforced by these miracles and that miracle with the bread. So here Jesus is in this moment, knowing where they're at and knowing what was happening on the other side of the sea, the ministry that was to take place. Something had to change. So Jesus went up and when he was praying, and when we go to pray, it's 20, 30, 15, 5 minutes. He was up there all night. So he goes up in the evening, and he's still there in the fourth hour. He was there like 3 to 6 a.m. So my second point is the headwind. In verse 24 it says, "But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them." So they had a headwind, and what we can see even in that picture, the width of the Galilee Sea is about 8 miles, and the length is 13. So if they were moving across, and John tells us they're about 3 to 4 miles out. So here they are in the dark of night with the wind and waves raging, and they're stuck halfway in between. So they weren't just offshore, they were in the middle of the ocean or the sea. And I don't know if any of you guys, but growing up in the ocean, we've been at the beaches at night and dark nights, and you see the ocean. It's not enticing. Like, I just don't want to go in. It's it's a little freaky. But they weren't considering going in, they were in the midst of it. In Mark, his version says Jesus saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. I mean, I've experienced that. How many of us have experienced that headwind? We're just going through life and we want to kind of just move through it, or at a minimum, we just want to know where you are, God, and what you're doing in our life. And we just come to this resistance that doesn't let us get past the place that we're at. I mean, sometimes just everyday life feels that way. Your kids, it's like the same thing yesterday and the next day. It's like, where are you, God, in the midst of this continuing resistance? I can't move from this place. It's frustrating and it's exhausting. So these headwinds keep us from continuing on with our lives as usual, when our lives as usual are missing something. It's missing something of him, a misunderstanding of who he is. The disciples were stopped in the middle of the sea, perfectly positioned for what was coming next. And so my point 3 is revelation. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them. Fourth watch, like I said, was 3 to 6 a.m. So that's quite a long time to be out to sea, just laboring. And really, it must have been somewhat frightening. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them. I mean, terrified is not like, wow, that freaked me out. It was like, I am scared to the point where I don't even know what's happening right now. My very foundations of what I thought was real have been shaken. And it's almost like the ground is like starting to move from under me and collapse. And I don't understand it. This used to be firm. And so in this moment, something started to shift, and it was important that this thing started to shift because their perspective needed to change. And so the continuing part of the revelation, you think about the ghost coming towards them. So it wasn't something, did you see that? No, this terrifying thing is coming at us. So at this moment, God had them totally off balance. And I'm seeing this, then what else, they're saying, what else in this universe isn't what it seems? And really, Jesus had them where he needed to have them in order for them to receive what he intended for them to see. Over their cries of fear, Jesus calls to them, "Take heart, it is I. Have no fear." Jesus reveals himself. Not simply as Jesus, their teacher, but I am. A more literal translation of this sentence would be, take heart, I am, do not be afraid. This self-revelation is a disclosure of the source of Jesus' power. It wasn't as a prophet or a teacher. It was as the Son of God. In Mark's account, he said he meant to pass him by. And that was another thing you kind of stop at and it's like, what does that mean? It doesn't even make sense. Like, was he not in tune with the will of God, the Spirit of God, that he misjudged what God was doing in the moment? A theophany is a visible manifestation of God's presence to human beings. This example of passing by, there's a couple other examples in the Old Testament. He passed by Moses. He passed by Elijah. And I think, I don't know if we have it, but Exodus 33:19. And he said, I will make my goodness pass before you and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and show mercy to whom I'll show mercy. And he did pass by. And we know Moses, he had to hide him in the cleft of a rock. And he's like, I will show you my glory, but I need to protect you because you would be, you wouldn't exist if you saw me. And so it was a moment of revelation to Moses. This is who is with you. The God that is so great that you can't even look upon him. And Elijah, we know that he was running and God found him hiding in a mountain. Jezebel, they were killing prophets and he was next. He knew it. So here he is hiding in a mountain and somewhat just laboring like, I'm going to die. And so God comes to him and he manifests again. He says, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passes by, and a great and strong wind tore through the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in an earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of a low voice, a little, they put it, low whisper. And that's interesting too, because God manifested his power in that moment. Is like, here's the power of God. This is who is with you, Elijah. But then where he was in was the still small voice. And sometimes that's the hardest part to hear him. Is we want the great manifestation of God, the power of God, show me. And he says, be silent. Listen. I'm right here. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, take heart, it is I. So right now we kind of move to the response. We have Peter's response and we have their collective response. Peter's response is, Lord, if it's you, command me to come. And Jesus says, come. The collective response is, and when he got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. So here we are, the beginning of them launching off that point on the map, moving back towards Capernaum, in the middle of the sea. At their starting point, they saw the good teacher who was full of power. And in this moment, they fell down and worshiped. They didn't say, who is this that appeared as a ghost? Who is this that ceased the winds? They said, you are truly the Son of God. So the headwinds had a purpose. The appearance of a ghost had a purpose. It shifted their very foundation in order to receive a truth that began to soften their hearts to what would be a full truth to come. So back to Peter's response, come. Peter in this moment just wanted to be where Jesus was. The safest place for him was where Jesus was. Peter's peace, assurance, safety was where Jesus was. Prior to getting out of the boat, Peter didn't ask for assurances if he could bring anything along. When he stepped towards Jesus, it had to be with empty hands and outstretched arms. And for a moment, he walked on water. I think about that and I was like, that wouldn't be my response, is tell me to do something that may kill me. It was like, show me something else that's pretty amazing. But his response was, command me to come. Because whenever he commands, it's a command that draws us to him. His commands always lead us to him. And if Jesus was to command Peter, that was good enough. Because what he commands, he backs up. And so when Peter took that step out, that water became solid. I know for me, it's like all of us, we all have filters. Like we filter everything through how it affects us. And we see things through how it affects us. You know, how do you feel about that? You know, what do you think about that? How do I think about this? And how do I think about that? It's me. And that's kind of how I've lived a lot of my faith, was just interpreting what I'm seeing and what's going on around me and what things do I want to be doing and what things do I not want to be doing. My question was never, is it you? Hey, somebody over there needs a meal. No, you know what? I'm busy. Is it you, Lord? I'm here. It's me. I mean, today was kind of, you know, it was God orchestrating something that we couldn't plan. This is the first time I'm doing this, and like I said, when he gives us ingredients, he came and tapped me on the shoulder, hanging out with the Father, just one of the many of us, and he says, hey, put this together and bring it to your brothers and sisters. Bring it to the family. And so I bring it, and I'm like, here, Eric, God said to go take this and make something. And he goes, he didn't tell me that, you do it. But we had Alyssa, we had Amanda. I mean, today, God said, today I'm using those, I'm tapping on their shoulder and saying, you go take this. Bring this on my behalf to them. And what is God saying to us? I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing. And all this stirring of the Spirit in all of us individually, and some just happened here today, was to give something that he intends for us to have. What would our lives look like if our only question in processing things is it you? And if it's you, command me to come. Because like I started, where you are, Lord, I am free. I have experienced that. But I've also spent years with headwinds trying to figure out, where are you in this? Peter's faith was little at that time when he stepped out. But we know Peter was a man of great faith. So even when God's not calling us, can you decide today that you will be people of great faith? He's not asking us that. He's like, will you ask, where am I in your life right now? And if you ask that question and I say, come, will you? And that's all really our faith is all about. It's like, where are you, Lord? I want to move towards that. Because whatever that is and wherever you are, for me, it's life-changing. It's life. If I'm struggling with anxiety, or I'm struggling with the weight of my work, if I'm struggling with the relationship, whatever I'm struggling with, he is there to provide that which we need, the comfort, the peace, the life, the purpose, the restoration, the healing. So the question is, will we come? I'm just going to leave it there because I think that's kind of where I felt the heart of what God was really trying to position us to, was this very thing is, if you look at me differently for who I am the all-powerful God, and within me is all your provision. I want you to come to me. And when I'm outside the boat, it's not because I'm trying to torture you. When you face a headwind, it's not because I'm frustrating you for no reason. It's because I love you, and the way you're seeing me is wrong. I am not a bad God that's caused hard things in your life. I'm a good God that's positioning you to receive me and receive that which I have for you. So I have to stop you, and I have to slow you down, And I want you to release everything that you're holding in your hands right now that's keeping you from stepping off. We can't step off the boat with the things we hang on. I want to step towards them, but I also want some level of control in my life. And I spent years negotiating with him, and I thought we had an agreement. And it took 7 years, so I said, okay, whatever. But not so much that. I really came to a place in my life after 7 years and said, Lord, if it's you, and you are right here in this miserable place, I will stay here the rest of my life. And he said, come. And the wind ceased, and he began to take us to...
It's good.
It's good, Pat. It's good.
So he has for us life. Don't be frustrated by the headwinds. And don't be unwilling to put down what we're holding. Let's step towards them.